Hello, I'm Peter Herbert. Welcome to the latest in our series of short CPD webinars looking at topical aspects of financial reporting and auditing. As auditors return from their summer holiday, minds, I'm sure, are turning to the implementation of ISQM1. We covered it lots in courses in the spring. We're still getting lots of queries. And what we're going to do in today's short session is remind you of the essentials, share with you probably 6 top tips to get to grips with this if you are looking to get moving on it and getting ISQM1 implemented for the first time. And to remind you as well that the implementation date for this is 15 December 2022. So a quick overview to kick off, just to remind you that we previously had ISQC1 and quality control. As the slide indicates, limited scope and reactive. What many firms would do is they would buy or develop an ISQC1 manual, and beyond developing it really, for many firms, nothing really would be done to actually implement it day to day. ISQM1 and quality management is very much more proactive and much more risk-based. So what you're going to think about here is what are the objectives around audit quality in our practice, what things might impinge us achieving those objectives, and what specific things do we need to put in place to address them. So in that sense, a very live and evolving process. And given that the risks for one firm are not going to be the same as the risks for another firm, it will be very much a bespoke process rather than the one that's quite simply devised or bought off the shelf. This slide just summarizes the steps and the implementation timeline. I think of those 5 steps, the first 4 are the key ones to think about in relation to 15 December 22. We'll talk about them all in the next few minutes. So set audit quality objectives, identify and assess risks that might impinge on those objectives being achieved, and then devise and implement responses. Monitoring and remediation is more of a 2023 issue. We're not going to therefore cover that off today. Quite an integral element of the monitoring and remediation going forward will be RCA, root cause analysis. And in terms of things you'll need to get you started, if you haven't already got started, don't be afraid to look at and use your existing policies and procedures. That might include lots of really good stuff. Do be willing to put your nose inside ISQM1 and have a look, have a read. You can download ISQM1 for free from the Financial Reporting Council website. And a very useful tool to complement ISQM1 itself is the excellent IAASB First Time Implementation Guide, both really important documents. In terms of what might impinge on audit quality in your practice, be willing to look at professional body feedback, so feedback coming from the FRC, from ICAW, from the ACCA, and be willing to actually look at the output of compliance reviews you've had done on your practice. So that's hot reviews, cold reviews, ACCA reviews, ICAW reviews. What have they raised as problem areas? That might inform your perception of where the risk is, and that might then inform your perception about what you need to do to address those risks in terms of responses. And do take time as an audit practice to talk about what the issues are, to talk about the appropriate responses, and listen to others and share ideas about how you can move that forward. It will require an investment of time, but with that investment of time, you can move it forward and you can easily implement a system of quality management that is absolutely, I would say, fit for purpose. Right, so that's, I suppose, the initial overview. Let's now run through my 6 top tips. And I think for those that are just getting started on this, the first important tip here is making sure that you are brainstorming risks to audit quality. What might be happening in our practice that might impinge on audit quality, and that might impinge on the achievement of our audit quality objectives. Now, you may remember from other things you've heard and read that what ISQM1 does, it basically has 8 sections. And of those 8 sections, 6 have got audit quality objectives already laid down. They're the sections highlighted in bold on this slide. And whilst firms might well devise their own audit quality objectives, and most smaller independent firms, I would say starting off with the ones that are already laid down will absolutely be the way to go. And what we're then thinking about is what could occur to mean that those audit quality objectives aren't being achieved. Now, you may remember, those of you that attended the May 22 ISQM1 conference that we ran on Zoom, that we did develop for that a document called 40 Key Questions to Ask to Inform Your Risk Assessment. If you attended that conference, you would have had a copy of that document. If you didn't attend the conference and would like a copy, do drop us an email. We can provide it. I'll give you the email address at the end of today's short session, but that could be quite a good kickstart to inform those conversations about where the risk might actually reside within your practice. Tip 2 is to use tools. Now, a number of the training companies and methodology providers have developed tools to help with ISQM1 implementation. We're a really big fan of the Apex Professional tool, the ISQM Toolkit. Now, here it is. I suppose why would we say we're big fans of this? I would say it in no way, shape, or form overcomplicates ISQM1 implementation. That, therefore, I think makes it a bit more manageable. It's very intuitive. It's very reasonably priced, and it's perfect for a slightly smaller independent firm. Now, you can purchase the toolkit via our website, and again, more information on that right at the end of today's session. One final point to make about risk assessments. Personal view, I think that of all those various areas and of all those various aspects of audit quality objectives, for a smaller independent firm, I think the governance and leadership strand will probably be the toughest one and will certainly require a lot of very careful thought. Now, here's from that 40 questions to ask document, the 7 questions that we're posing around governance and leadership. I'm not going to go through all these. I suppose my basic point would be that these might be quite tough questions that might inform some quite tough conversations about how you actually run your audit practice, certainly in a smaller firm, maybe where audit's not a main revenue stream, and certainly where the tax is, the practice rather is far more tax driven, and that might in some sense, I suppose, potentially impinge the achievement of very, very high quality on the audits that you do. So there might be some quite important conversations there. There might be some quite important actions there. It might take a while for those actions to actually get delivered, but don't forget governance and leadership. It is an important area. And as I say, I think for a smaller firm, perhaps compared to the other areas of audit objectives, that might be for some more challenging than any. Okay, tip 4 is about devising responses. This obviously follows on from the risk assessments. And I suppose, yeah, here's where the tailoring element becomes really important, because what's a risk for one firm, for one audit practice, will not be a risk for another. Therefore, the response must respond to the risk, which is going to vary from case to case. Very important as well to track to ensure that you do actually deliver on the responses, on the actions that you put in place. Don't be afraid in relation to responses, though, to draw on the very good policies, the very good procedures that lots of firms already have in place. There may not be a need to really reinvent the wheel here if you're already doing lots of really good stuff to actually inform good audit quality in your firm. This is an extract from the ISQM toolkits, and it just, I suppose, demonstrates the point what may have happened. We may have, through that brainstorm, have devised a number of risks around, for example, governance and leadership, for example, around relevant ethical requirements. What we're now thinking about is what do we put in place to actually address that? Who's going to take responsibility for that action? And by when is that action going to actually have been achieved? And again, as we'll see when we come on to the last of my top tips around documentation, very important to appreciate that as far as the system of quality management is concerned, a very key part of the documentation will be an action plan linked to those risks, linked to your audit quality objectives, which is the start point for the whole process. Now, along the way, don't forget ISQM paragraph 34. Notwithstanding the risks that you determine are relevant to your firm and the responses that you put in place to address those risks, there are certain specific responses in relation to audit quality that ISQM requires that are not necessarily related to risks in your practice. And again, as we covered on the ISQM conference back in May, some of those responses are based on the ISSB in the standard itself. Now, some of this stuff is pretty straightforward. Every firm that we speak to, every firm that we visit will have annual independence declarations from relevant staff. But not every firm that we talk to, not every firm that we visit has got policies in place when decline information is received once they've begun an audit. You've taken on a new client, you've gone through your acceptance protocols, you've taken them on, you've begun the audit, and you then realize once you've started that if you'd known earlier on what you know now, you wouldn't have taken the audit on. What do we do next? That for many will not be an area where there will formally be a policy. There will need to be one now because paragraph 34 of ISQM specifically requires it. Furthermore, the FRC has kind of gold-plated the UK version of ISQM1 and said, actually, we're going to put specific things in place over and above the strict responses required by the IAASB, and we're going to require firms to embrace these as well. Now, again, some of these points will be pretty straightforward. Policies to ensure partners do not jeopardize independence, where you've got good independence protocols, good ethics protocols that very much embrace the requirement of the ethical standard. You'll already be well on with that. Some of the points here will not apply. Many firms that we work with don't have PI audits, don't have EP audits, but there will be a need to think through paragraph 34 over and above responses that you put in place to address the audit quality risks you devised and the earlier part of the process. And again, if you were to embrace the ISQM toolkit, that will very much be pushing you towards thinking about responses that address the requirements there in paragraph 34. Tip 5, check in with service providers. Again, those of you that are well on with this will know all about service providers and what they do. What they do for an audit practice is they will provide IT services relevant to audits. They'll provide possibly your audit methodology. They'll provide file review services. They'll provide training services. The point that the ISQM makes really clear is that whilst you may well outsource these aspects to third-party organizations, the system of quality management is yours and you've got to take responsibility for it. So you've got to appraise whether these service providers are on point in what they do and whether it ensures that you do indeed achieve appropriate audit quality in your practice. Now, those service providers should be proactive in providing communications to you that make clear that what they offer does indeed ensure that your audit quality objectives are being achieved. If not, get on the front foot, reach out to them and get them to confirm that what they do and how it does indeed link into audit quality. I think you'll find that organizations in this area probably will be proactive themselves. It should therefore be a check-in rather than you grilling them on what they do and whether it's fit for purpose in your practice. It remains to be seen, but that's certainly my thoughts about the way the service provider communication will actually work in practice. And finally, tip 6, write it all down. Again, one or two firms I've spoken to recently that are well on with the process are a little bit unclear about what writing it down might actually entail. I've kind of got 3 ideas here about what that might look like. Firms may well have an audit compliance manual. They may well have policies and procedures. Now, they may have existed previously under the old ISQC1 regime. They might look very similar now. The compliance manual, the policies and procedures might be slightly increased, where perhaps an action off the back of a risk assessment, where perhaps an action off the back of paragraph 34 means that you need to actually do something formally that you weren't doing before, or perhaps beef up and bulk out a little bit your compliance manual and your policies and procedures. A very important further element of what you will document then will be that ISQM action plan. So what was the objective? What was the risk? What was the response? Who's taking responsibility? And when will that be achieved by? And again, that's a very useful element really of the ISQM toolkit. It leads you toward action planning as a very important part of this process. Now, it might well be having put that documentation together, but your ISQC1 document then gets thrown away. Before you do throw it away, do have a careful read through. Are there important protocols? Are there important processes within that ISQC1 manual that are very important to carry forward? And do they need to be captured within one of these 3 documents as you move forward in the ISQM1 world? So there we are. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight as to where you might go in terms of kicking off the process. I know a number of firms are already quite well on with it, so good luck with it. If you do want a copy of that 40 key questions to ask to inform your risk assessment process, do drop us an email at inquiries@insight-training.co.uk. And there's our website address for all our training courses we're running over the course of the autumn and winter in 2022, including, of course, very importantly, courses that address ISQ implementation. And through the website as well, you can access and purchase the ISQM toolkit I referred to a couple of times during today's short session. Hope that was useful. Good luck with it all, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Goodbye.